Hello, Sebastiana. We're going to take a look at your 5 characteristics of light. Uh, and so we're going to go ahead and open it up here and kind of just go through first and take a look at how your posting came out, whether it kind of flows the way that we wanted it to flow. You've got your direction and intensity. You got all your images sort of indicated there. You've got your tags, temperature, good. Contrast, looks very good. And hardness. I noticed that that direction was in color. I guess you kind of maybe you either redid it or couldn't find it at first, because I do see that you did move over into black and white later on, but we'll set that aside for a moment. It's kind of looking through all of these, your exposures look just fine. In other words, the quality of the images from light to dark, they don't seem overall too dark or overall too light. In this case, if they were, we would have maybe a slight problem with the sensor in your camera or something like that, but I don't see that happening at all. So that's also very good. If there's any one thing that I am noticing technique wise, or it is is your focus. In other words, where you're focusing and whether it is truly in focus, sharp focus or not. This can be very difficult, especially when you're in a still life situation where things are very close up. Your viewfinder is probably really pretty small, and it can be very, very challenging to see if things are in fact in focus or not in focus. There may be a small magnifier, or there a focusing aid in the camera. So perhaps we'll take a look at that, because it looks like you maybe missed focused on a couple of these. Not that you didn't focus, but it just was like slightly off. And so you're getting these sort of overall fuzzy looking images. That aesthetic can work sometimes really, really well, but I'm fairly certain it's not what you were deliberately trying to do. Right off from the very beginning, I'm very pleased with your kind of approach here. You are using not just the objects, but you're also using the shadows that are happening. You're using the background as a surface. Everything seems to be working really well. Here, we might have actually come in, pulled this object a little bit closer. And the reason for that is the detail that we have right up in here is actually holding our attention. It pulls us away from the rest of the image, our eyes drifting back into the other parts of the image. This is a kind of a visual phenomenon that happens when people look at compositions. There are certain areas that that people will look at first, and there are certain zones, or there are certain objects and certain components, like high contrast areas where there's a really bright next to a very dark. That's going to compete for attention. Something like something that's very sharp next to something that's very blurry, that's going to compete for attention. Something that has lots of detail versus something that doesn't have lots of detail, that's going to give you a draw of attention. And that is one of the things that's happening here. You've got lots of detail. You've also got a point of high contrast right here between this and this. You've also got shape here, a very strong shape that's pulling your eye away. And it's not so much over here. This is all fine. It's this shape right up here. And what I would want you to do is, while you're hearing me talk about your photographs, is go ahead and put your hand up. Put your hand up right onto over your field of view, closing one eye, and put your hand up and block the very top of this jar. Or whatever this vessel happens to be. Put your hand over so you're covering up basically this portion of it, where you don't have that detail. And what you're going to notice immediately is that the rest of the composition sort of almost goes pop. It kind of opens up. And the reason for that is our eyes are being drawn right here. Even when we're deliberately looking over in this location here, our eyes want to go here. because of the detail, because of the contrast. So by covering that up and letting it run off the edge, it becomes a shape and not an object. It pacifies that detail here because it's less detail, and it immediately shifts the point of highest contrast over here, moves it over here, because now you don't have that. It's not competing anymore. It's one of those things that you really kind of start to figure out. One of the things that photography does in terms of teaching composition does very well is how to frame and how to use the edges of a composition to your advantage. In a lot of these others, you're missing just a little bit. If we did the same thing, just kind of moving in ever so slightly, coming off of this, basically covering our one eye and covering this segment up. Just put your hand right over this so that it's covering this. You'll see the rest of the composition kind of, comes to life. It's small areas like that that can really affect what you're doing. Now, these two compositions, they're very, very similar. Try to avoid that when you're posting images in the future, where you've got very similar images, 1 and 2. 1 and 2, it's kind of like almost like stuttering. We don't necessarily need those two images next to one another. It's not such a big deal here because it's an exercise, and we're really more interested in the way you're handling light. But I will say, as you move forward, if you have images that are this close in composition, or even closer sometimes, choose which one, and then go with it. And then for the next one, pick another composition, something that is a little bit more, a little farther away from the other. It does seem like you are really interested in forming shapes out of shapes in these first anyway, because you're grouping things very well. You've got, we'll talk about this image in a second. You're creating triangles, you're creating a dynamic sort of overall shape. This is called the Gestalt principle, when you create a kind of unified whole out of a lot of specific things. This is very good. We do have a couple of things to pay attention to. And again, this will be something that you start to learn. Here I can see, it looks like either the edge of this fabric and maybe even someone's hand over here. And then also the sort of afterglow of the light. The light needed to be, have the barn doors turned in just a little bit so you didn't get that sort of specular kind of haze over here. At least it's not in this image. That can work really well sometimes, this haze, but we want to kind of know that it's happening and be able to control it whenever we do see it happening. For instance, in this image, it's less of a problem, particularly if we minimize it a little bit more. So again, using the technique we were just talking about, closing one eye, putting your hand over this area, basically right in the middle of where this little sort of soft, I guess you would maybe call it a magenta color, kind of starting to come in. Put your hand right over that, and you'll see that that haze isn't so aggressive there, and it allows your eye to get back over into here. So this sort of flare here is interrupting your images, much the same as I was talking about this area interrupting the composition. Technique-wise, as far as like exploring the characteristics of light, all of this looks like you're doing exactly what we want you to do. Your handling of the camera seems good, except for that critical focus thing. So this is a reason why I'm much more interested in talking to you about the consequence of some of the things. You're doing really a good job with angles of the shadows and working with those into the composition, using shape into the composition. There's some subtleties here that working with your camera more will help. Now, this image here, I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about, because this is a really interesting photograph because of the way that you have kind of formalized it. In other words, the way you've set things up in this pattern here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these different sections, really gives you a sense of rhythm that's happening. You've got this beautiful sort of glow that's happening here. You've got the light wrapping around. This is a really good solution to the backlighting puzzle. You're getting the consequence here of that harsh light even glowing past the paint of that bottle. Again, the one thing with this minor tuning up, if we had come in just a little bit, cropped over here, so that we don't even see these shapes over here. We don't even need that. And then cropped over here as well on this side, the same. Do that, and this is almost becomes a vertical image where we cut the bottle here and we cut this object here. If we don't have either of those, kind of looking at it like this, you'll see it just like pops and just comes to life. These are the small things you're going to start to notice as you make more and more photographs. And these are going to be the difference between a picture of an object and the photograph that communicates just what you want. Now, getting in here with the temperature looks like, or at least, hang on, let me back up here and see what you're identifying these as. Oh, we got intensity. Oh, it looks like it skipped something here. Okay, it skipped some of yours on the viewfinder. Let me look at those a little bit more closely here. I'll kind of fake zoom in on them here and take a look. Now, here you're completely out of focus. There's nothing in focus in these images. I don't know if that was a problem or if it was deliberate, but because nothing is in focus, you can get away with it. Believe it or not, because you're using these geometric shapes and you're using light to your advantage, who cares if it's in focus or not? It can still resonate as true. This is magnificent, really. I know it's so simple. I know that it's just a series of bottles juxtaposed this way, but the rhythm and the energy and the harmony that you created there is really, really working. Here you've even given it more breathing room. You've separated those things out, kind of come around a little bit. You're letting a shadow wrap around these. These are really working well. Here, I'm not so sure. Here it gets a little bit kind of like, well, let's see what else we can do. Kind of ran out, but then you found it again. So a lot of times when you're making photographs, you'll make some images that really like work, and then you'll continue to make them and continue to make them, and then you'll find yourself not making images that really work. And then you continue to make images and continue to make images, and some of them start not to work, and then suddenly you find them working again, but in a different way. This is the process of making images. This is the process of creative photography. Kind of like when you're doing a drawing and you're making multiple marks on a page. You'll draw, you'll make a mark, and then you might go over that mark or redo the mark or kind of bend it or re-emphasize it. Making images and kind of moving things around, and that's kind of the equivalent here. Intensity looks like you were kind of took off in terms of the compositions, and I'm really happy to see that you kind of let loose a little bit more on that. Now with your temperature, we introduced another element into it just to give you more variety and to add some tonal color to it. And we're doing some pretty subtle stuff here. It looks like you might be shifting the light, but not quite the temperature of your camera in the same way. We've got your temperature of your lights, which is really well documented here, and you can see what's happening. You're getting a juxtaposition of these different tones, and all of that works pretty well. But experiment with the other element of shifting the white balance in your camera from the sun icon to the clouds icon, which is daylight, to open sky, things like this. you're going to really find some real shifts in variation. You can get purples and sometimes even like pinks and magentas. But this portion of the project was really all about, here, let me zoom back out again, was really all about kind of introducing you to the function of temperature and the control within your camera on that white balance, and that they do matter. It's a control that is up to you. We don't want to use auto white balance most of the time, unless we are in a situation where we need to make photographs very, very quickly and we don't have time to shift it back and forth. But most of the time in a studio, you're going to be able to spend your time and decide what the white balance is and shifting it. It's no different than choosing a different color in painting or a different brush, things like this. So take advantage of those things that you have. And then we get into the contrast, which was actually the second portion of our project, or at least the second project that we shot. And here again, we got some things that are a little bit out of focus, not quite full focus. We should probably just kind of figure out, what's going on there, whether you are, kind of not getting them in focus, or whether you're really interested in exploring this as an aesthetic. If you're really interested in exploring it as an aesthetic, the project with the movement is really going to excite you. Also, we would want to push it even farther, though. Make sure that the images are deliberately out of focus and very out of focus. I'm not going to tell anybody that they can't do any particular thing in terms of exploring. What I want to do is see what you're kind of working on, and then maybe give you some observational feedback on how you might be able to push it. So even when you have something like this, I'll say, if you meant to do it, let's see what we can do to make it even more dramatic, and I'll help you kind of work that out. But if you didn't, let's figure out maybe what's going on and why you might be having trouble with that. The reflection here, when you use a reflector rather than a second light, you're going to get a completely different style of a photo. You're really going to get a much less harsh comparison between the lightest lights and the darkest darks. You're also going to get always more subtle variation between the lightest lights and the darkest darks, because you're just grabbing the leftover light from your key light. The reflector is never going to interfere with the intensity of your fill light. Your key light, the main light source. The main light source, its job is to establish the direction of your light and to be the overall luminosity, provide overall luminosity. When you add a fill light, which we did in the intensity, a second light, you're in danger of maybe having those two lights close together in terms of power, and they compete with one another, and they interrupt one another. With a reflector in the contrast portion here that we're looking at, you don't have that problem. What you have is just the leftover light that is passing by the objects. You're then catching it with the reflector and aiming it back into the scene. It's always going to be appropriately darker than what you would have gotten otherwise. And you can't get this kind of subtlety. Wow, this is really, really super cool, because you've got the harshness over here, but then you've got this real subtlety here in the shadow areas. That's something that really a reflector can only produce. And you'll find that most of the time, 80% of the time, a reflector is going to be the tool to use over a fill light. A fill light kind of comes in when you find that the overall scene is just too dark. You can't get enough light on it. Then you need more light. If you don't need more light, go with the reflector first and see if you can achieve what you need to there. And only afterward, if you really can't do it, go with the other. Using some of these same strategies, now that you've got these bottles kind of working together and you're kind of using them in this sort of patternistic way, it seems like you're able to focus more on the lighting scenario rather than what do you do with the objects. Here, I like that you still are playing around with the color temperature in the hardness. That's great. Hardness is also about diffusing that light. So softening the key light, softening the fill light if you're using it. You didn't have to use a fill light if you didn't want to. Here we have a much better, let's see, can we get into that? No, there's some reason you're having a little bit of some reason you're not be able to get the zoom in, the full view of your images. We'll find out why that is. You're using the same objects over and over again, which is fine. Coming into that, excuse me, using the same images and coming in on those same images or same objects, it's going to desensitize your eyes to those objects. You're going to start to see them as something other than what they actually are, see them for the shapes. It's kind of like saying a word over and over again. Like you say the word like, temp, 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 temp. You say it a bunch of times over and over again, temp, temp, temp. It loses all meaning. It just becomes a sound at that point. Same thing happens when you're looking at objects in photography over and over and over and over again. Your eyes become desensitized to it, and you start to see it for its shape, its texture, its tonal quality, and things like that. So it does take a lot of exploration to do that. Unless you have trained and you're practiced at it, at getting your mind to immediately go to that. And hopefully that's where we want to get you. We want to get you to be able to like turn it on and go, okay, I am going to desensitize myself to the subject. I'm not making images of bottles or flowers or people. I'm making images of light and tone and texture, and I'm making images of beauty, and I'm making images of friend, and I'm making pictures of love. That's when you start to get into desensitizing yourself to the subject and seeing it more for the possibility and the potential it has for communicating what you need to communicate, which is always going to be what's important to me. You seems like you got more and more comfortable and more relaxed with these photographs as we moved on. I would have encouraged you even more so to really get in and get closer to some of these bottles, really play around with the juxtaposition, whether they're in shape, whether you see the whole shape or not the whole shape. The focus thing, which we'll address, figure out what's going on there, whether it's something that you're just having trouble seeing or whether you're trying to play around with the out of focus. I can help you with either direction. We'll just figure out which one it is. Overall, I think your images are really quite doing well. It looks like all of the parameters are working for you, except for maybe you forgot to get it onto black and white on the first one. The last one, you had an option to go with black and white or color, so that's cool. But little things like that you want to pay attention to, obviously. I don't put those in there to trip you up. I put those in there actually to help you so that you have one less thing to think about in terms of tonal quality and things like that. You don't have to think about color or temperature when you're in that grayscale. But it also is about introducing you to the camera controls. It's not just for fun. I want you to go in and know how to make something black and white, or know how to shift it back to color and then back to black and white again. When you do that, you're going to start to familiarize yourself to camera controls that you otherwise might not have ever known about. So having you do those is an important part of it, so that you get to know some of these tools rather than just kind of running through them as a list. I kind of introduce them as aesthetic components of each project. So that's what I have for you. Hopefully it was very helpful. Obviously, you can ask me questions. I'd be happy to answer anything that you have. And definitely let's get together. Come on over with your camera. If you are having trouble sort of seeing and getting the focus the way you want, I can take a look and we can solve that problem together. All right. Well, we'll see you in the studio. Bye now.